So, you know, we trucked lobster to Boston so that they could sell it as New England lobster for years. And so they made the extra markup on it. Now we have an opportunity now to sell that as Nova Scotia lobster, Atlantic Canadian lobster, and we've got an opportunity now to brand our product, and I think we'll see an increased yield in that. They're doing some really cool things with Nova Scotia community colleges, and Kendra had mentioned, you know, the importance and the significance of our post-secondary education. We made a great announcement today, Don. We were in Port Hawkesbury this afternoon, and just as a training hub, marine training hub in Port Hawkesbury. But Danny and Jimmy are doing a piece now with the university here, just research on lobster and crab shell and maximizing the byproducts of that as well. I agree, you know, and I'm in pretty good contact with the mayor on a regular basis and the councillors with regard to some of the big projects. And you know, you work your tail off. There's no guarantee on the big projects, but you keep working and hoping that you know that stuff drops. But in the meantime, and I was talking to Mr. Johnson over here, you know, like investments like the Momentum Project, those are getting some of the best and the brightest young minds an opportunity to work together and bring their startup initiatives to the market. So I think you want to get the ball in play and get those singles and doubles sort of thing, but in the same time try to chase the big ones. I think that's pretty much. I'll close on this one, because Kendra and Eldon and Jim all mentioned it too. There does have to be an attitudinal change. We have to be more welcoming as a community. We have to be more welcoming as a community. The institutions are doing a great job of drawing new Canadians to our community, and we have to know that that they're wanted, that they're respected, that they can be supported, and I think we do a better job of that then. And the birth rates are down. I know, geez, we came from a big family in Glace Bay. I didn't do my part. I only have 3, but if we could pick up the young guys, we gotta get that birth rate up. So. Anyway, those are my comments, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay. Thank you. Earlene.
Thank you. For the record, my family has put out 4 kids, so I'm done. I put in my part. Tapping out right here on that one. To go back to the question, though, I too am new to council. I've only been in here for a year, but I'll always take my opportunity to say something. To go back to the original question, the positive for me that I've taken out so far is both the progression in secondary education and training and youth employment. It is obviously our youth are going to save us, so to know that they're being educated and more of them are stepping up and finding work here is great, and therefore I'm hopeful that that's going to be enough to start the process of retention when they start to work here and realize they like it here and they want to build more for each other. So that's my positive. In the exact same breath, my concern is actually the migration, and it's great that as, One Nova Scotia, that the numbers are up, but ours are really, really down. And so I guess my biggest concern with the whole project is that we may get lost in it, that it'll be everyone's going to pat themselves on the back because our numbers are gone up, we're doing so great. But because I think we have excessive centralization in our province, and what did you refer to it, fiscal fairness? Is that how you?
Fiscal imbalance.
Fiscal imbalance, yes. So due to those things, I'm worried that we might, in certain areas, fisheries we're doing great, tourism we're doing great, but in the areas that really mean something for the success and the survival of this portion of the province, I just don't want to get lost in that. I really want to make sure that we're concentrating on migration happening provincially wide, not just, in all areas, not just Cape Breton, but the South Shore, and, we want the whole thing to grow together. So that's really all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Dan.
Thank you very much, Tom, and I just want to thank Don for all the work that he's doing in developing the metrics for the One Nova Scotia report. The one stat that gave me a lot of hope was this one here about seafood. And we in CBRM are doing our part there, but there's 3 things about seafood that are really very positive. One, we're developing a natural resource. That's key. So many times we've ignored the natural resource industry, be it forestry, be it agriculture, be it aquaculture. But this is, seafood is leading us in a natural resource area. Two, it's all about entrepreneurship. And that's one thing that we found in the One Nova Scotia report, that we needed more entrepreneurs and more successful entrepreneurs. And the whole seafood story emphasizes how entrepreneurship can make a difference in our economy. And third, it's exports. We don't have enough firms in Nova Scotia doing export. And the seafood industry here is leading the way that if we do exports, we're bringing foreign currencies into our economy and growing the economy that way. So for those three reasons, I think seafood for me is the big winner. The one stat that gives me worry is actually not here. And I appreciate the One Nova Scotia metric that we're looking at the whole province, and Don had showed where provincially our population is growing. But when I looked at the 2016 census stats, I started looking at specifically the Cape Breton numbers. And Darren is perfectly correct. I mean, we lost 30,000 people, the equivalent of the city of Sydney, over the last 25 years. And if you look at each of the economic regions of Nova Scotia, and I have them broken down here, Halifax and Annapolis Valley were the two areas that grew over the past 10 years. But the three areas that declined were the South Shore, the North Shore, and the area that declined the most over the past 10 years in terms of percentage was Cape Breton. It declined minus 7.23%. That's the stat that worries me. I know it's not captured by your metric, but I know from looking at census stats that we're in a population decline. And that's the one that worries me.
Thank you, Dan. Cecil.
Yep. Thanks very much, Tom. I guess we're all here because we live in hope, because we want to help make change wherever we can, and people do. And so I always appreciate that aspect whenever we have things. But when you look at where we are, if I go to my worry is just, are we as governments prepared to resource the hope? Like where Cape Breton does well, are we prepared to reward that success and stop saying there's only so much of a pie per capita or this region? And I'll go to where Tammy was. On a One Nova Scotia basis, I've always defended the Yarmouth Ferry and investing in a sea route. That sea highway is very important. Now, the debate over what's the best vessel and the operating, I'd be happy to join that, but I've never, with Mayor Mood, said, look, you need that, Nova Scotia needs it. It is one of those costs that we have to look at that provides prosperity elsewhere. So in Cape Breton, on our side, if we're leading in tourism, why are we afraid to invest in more success in tourism? And thankfully, the fishery is one where people are responding. The federal government, the industry is investing, and we're seeing those successes. So in tourism, it's one of those areas where Cape Breton is truly a leader and an innovator, yet are you prepared to resource that hope? And I guess where I'm at is, because if you look at the game changer, the first one was about new politics, and it really is about, so if in Pictou County there's some other formula they need for their One Nova Scotia success, we shouldn't be beating up saying we're not getting those dollars if we're getting the dollars for the priorities that our region say are our top priorities to address those needs. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. So now I'd just like to facilitate a conversation, talk show style, picking up on some of the themes that have come up. And the speakers that preceded me talked about retention, out-migration, the concern about significant population decline, linked to some extent to a welcoming attitude and a culture of entrepreneurship. Can we find pockets in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, either places or projects, that give us a nucleus for growth? If we want to get behind winners to change that trajectory, what are the winners we would get behind? Can any of us point to examples? Kendra.
Yeah,
actually brought up by Gary. It was the New Dawn Center for Innovation. The project was brought before council, this amazing hub of innovation, arts, culture, right in our downtown in Sydney. And that, to me, is a phenomenal thing. It has many spin-offs. One, it is there as a hub so that there's people who are all working together in these areas, and they're not in silos because they're together. There's a communal thing happening there, which is fantastic. The other thing is it draws people towards that area. It draws tourism in that area. It draws ourselves, who at times where we don't often support our local small businesses. But this thing has a potential to be a complete and utter draw and change also what the North End looks like. Okay. So I think that is a very much a nice little hub that is starting to take wing.
So you've picked up, Kendra, on the hub theory or quality of place theory. And in
Very
the
much
social
so.
science literature, sort of there is a stream that focuses on that, Richard Florida among others.
Yes.
And it's sort of the notion that there is a generation of young entrepreneurs, opportunity seekers that might not have a job lined up in an industry, but they'll settle somewhere and start a business because they find the place cool and stuff's happening and there's a buzz. Is there anything to that? And is there something we can expand on, not just in downtown Sydney, but in other hubs in the region? Does anyone want to sort of pick up on that? Cecil.
Well, I just happen to know that Minister Mumberket's on the phone, and I think building on what Kendra was just saying, I think the idea of a community college in the downtown core, building that hub, I don't know if the minister would like to say anything, but it is about that. We talked about our new library, Game Changers, a new library. We look at what it's done for Halifax, and we've been working and planning. But I don't know, not to put Derek on the spot, but the community college is one of those vision pieces that does create that hub, not only for Sydney, but the wider Cape Breton region.
Derek, sorry to have skipped you over as we went around the table. Can you hear us? Can we bring you into the conversation?
No, I'm here.
Oh, there's Derek, yeah.
I didn't hear what Cecil had to say. I hit some static. No, listen, I appreciate it, and I'm in a garage right now, so if I lose you guys, I apologize. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, very well.
So, yeah, just on your first question, I was listening in on some of the strengths and some of the fears that I have. The fear for me has always been out-migration in the community and how we try to stem the tide. It's been something that has been going on for a few generations. It's something that I talked about with my colleagues who are there on council, and something that we need to address to be successful. In my experience, some of the more positive things has been the growth of Member 2 in the sense of entrepreneurship that has transpired there in self-government and the direction that they're taking. Some strategic investments when it comes to the second berth and some other projects hopefully on the horizon that we'll see come true. And for me, you know, the New Dawn project is a big one because if you go back to Entrevester a few years ago, the CBRM is actually considered the fastest growing startup community in Atlantic Canada. So we need to do whatever we can to support and continue to support that culture of entrepreneurship, and kudos to NSDC and CBU for the work that they've been doing in the community. We've seen a number of startups pop up in the community, building on, you know, the Protocases of the world and the Mercados of the world that are doing business across the world. So that will be a big part of our success moving forward. And I also think there's a legislative side of this. I think that, you know, I just finished a tour across the province, and we're talking to municipalities who have new and innovative ways that they want to do business, and they want to work with the provincial government. And I made that commitment to them, and I make that commitment to home, that we want to look at ways that we can support growth and support a new sense of responsibility and somewhat more decision-making powers for the municipality. So these are all conversations that are happening now, and I'm really glad that I could come on the phone and be part of it. And I do want to recognize some of the staff from Municipal Affairs are there, so I really appreciate you coming to Cape Breton to be part of the conversation.
Derek, just a quick follow-up, and thank you very much for those points. So as you look at potential obstacles to startups, to hubs, what are you starting to see? And perhaps what are you starting to see in your new role now that you're able to burrow down a little more into some of those obstacles?
Well, what I'm seeing in the new role, and really across the province, a lot of communities are taking the lead of trying to create those creative spaces within their communities, trying to encourage traditional entrepreneurs to come together with new Canadians, with post-secondary students, and it's really great. I was involved with that at CBU and with NSCC, and we saw a number of international students come forward at the time who are interested in staying in Canada and opening those businesses. We've seen some of them pop up in the CBRM, and I've heard stories across the province. So I don't know if I don't want to call it an obstacle, because we are, as a government, trying to make some moves to encourage new Canadian entrepreneurship. I just think we got to continue to push as hard as we can to, and specifically for the CBRM, to continue to build, as a government, set priorities for infrastructure like New Dawn. Take those traditional industries such as fishing, and we saw an example with that with C++ and Lewisburg Seafoods coming forward with private investment to support new entrepreneurs. The more that we can connect, the private sector with entrepreneurs as mentors is going to go a long way. We've seen the early stages of it, but if we're going to be successful as a community, those larger scale projects are extremely important. But ultimately, too, we need to support those entrepreneurs, as I said, the Mercados of the world, the Protocases of the world, those companies that will stretch far beyond our borders to do business.
Okay. So I'm just keeping a running list of some points of consensus. So the need for the One Nova Scotia collective to burrow down to the Cape Breton stats and indicators so that we can keep track of our progress. Sort of hearing a little bit of support around the hubs and the anchor institutions and what they can do. Mentorship. There may be some low-hanging fruit there for entrepreneurs who have great ideas and just need a little bit of a push. And Tammy, you were next to just add a comment.
Thank you. So to kind of pick up where Cecil left off, I do believe, in this hub idea, and I think that's a wonderful idea. However, I do have some issues in CBRM being like Halifax. I know in CBRM, we feel that everything goes to Halifax and nothing comes across the causeway. Well, in New Waterford, Glace Bay, North Sydney, and Sydney Mines, we feel everything is in Sydney. So I think there has to be some reinvestment into those communities as well, because to keep people in Waterford, to keep the schools open and the hospital open and in Glace Bay and in those areas, we need to have something sustainable there for people to work toward or work with.
What does that look like, Tammy? Does that mean sort of each community rethinking what is its vocation and doing something that's totally unique in the world? Or does it mean sort of being careful with how we divide the pie? How does that look?
Well, I think we first of all have to be very careful on how we divide the pie, because right now, and I mean for years past, equalization has been a huge issue for CBRM, and I think it still is, and I think it needs to be looked at. But however, when that equalization comes to CBRM, I think it also needs to be looked at to the outlying communities. However, we cannot expect people to come to the community of New Waterford. When I was growing up, people came from Halifax to shop in New Waterford because it was the place to go to shop. Now, there's nowhere to go. But so we can't expect people to come and work in Nova Scotia, in New Waterford, and in Glace Bay when we have the lowest minimum wage in all of Canada. And when you come here, don't hope for health care because you're not going to get a doctor. I think these issues need to be addressed before we can attract and maintain people in our communities. We can't get doctors to come now. How can we get people to come? People that are coming to this community to live. Friends of mine go back to Toronto to see their doctor. We cannot sustain communities without the resources, and we are not being provided with the resources. And when we're making the lowest minimum wage, people cannot afford to live, pay a mortgage, and feed their families.
Arlene?
Thank you. And I'm not one to start a debate, but that is a little sarcasm. But no, I don't, I don't like the word can't. It's very difficult. Yes, indeed, it's very difficult. We have issues with our health care and we have issues with retention, but part of the attitude, I think, and a responsibility of everyone around the table is, I think, to acknowledge where we lack, but at the same time, try to find a way to continue on and improve until we get control of those situations. But to sit here and say, well, we can't expect people to come because, no, we need to work to fix the because, but in the meantime, we're going to try and offer, in my opinion, as many solutions as we can to make you come. Like, for example, and I also understand the centralization within Sydney. It's something you hear all the time. You know, the north side of Sydney gets everything. They're getting a new library. They're moving the school. They're, you know, but again, if we want to retain our youth, if we want to attract people, like I said, I have a bunch of kids. The youngest is 18. My kids don't want to move anywhere in the country that looks like the north side. But would they move to a place like Sydney if it had some culture and it had things for it to do? Absolutely. And when they move to the downtown core, because there's things to attract them there, when they meet someone, when they get a partner, when they decide to buy a home, that's when they'll spread out. And I think we need to plant the seed to give our youth a reason. Like, you know, if you're on the north side, if you don't drive, it's hard for the young people to go see a movie. Well, maybe if my kids are lucky enough to find employment in their trades or in their fields here, and Sydney has some things for them to offer, then maybe they'll move to Sydney as opposed to Halifax, and then eventually spread out. And as far as, I think it's a responsibility, especially as district councilors, you know, some of us have very rural areas. It's impossible to ever assume that they're going to be anything resembling Sydney. Some of us have downtown, some of us don't. Some, you know, so I think the thing is I think our communities need to be responsible to have its own inclusion. Like on the north side, Sydney Mines areas right now, there's a little program, Inspiring Communities, and it's trying to figure out as a community, what can we do to make people feel like they belong, that we can help each other through it, that kids want to stay. And it's not because they want to stay there perhaps, but, you know, so I really think in regards to that, like subculture, that's a big positive thing. Like, for example, it's taking off on the north side. I met with a young gentleman. He decided to come here. He is in communications working with this project, and he was just determined, and he's meeting more and more people like that, and he is starting to discover a subculture that is actually existent in different areas all over the CBRM. New Waterford has one, Glace Bay has one, the north side has one, so I think we need to take advantage of that.
Thank you. So I'll go to Eldon, and then I'm going to pose a question to which I would just like to get a quick soundbite from everyone. Eldon.
Thanks very much, Tom. Just going back, I guess, in the vision of hubs. I think hubs are very important, and I think it's irrelevant on what the hub is, because whoever's involved in that hub is going to believe that that hub is one of the most vital parts of our community, no matter what is happening within that hub. And I get it. I'm the councillor for the Sydney core area of the municipality, and I hear that I get everything and Sydney gets everything. And I think it's fair for me to say that I'm very supportive of projects throughout the municipality. I've always thought of the big picture. I don't think and never have said that everything should come to Sydney, and I don't propose that anybody around this table thinks that. But when we look at projects like Synergy Lewisburg, we look at the Memorial Park project in Sydney Mines, we've got a project in downtown Sydney that we're looking at, downtown Glace Bay we're looking at. There's various projects that are all important, and we have to try to figure that out, because we have to grow our municipality as a municipality. I would never believe in growing Sydney, and let's grow Sydney, and eventually in 30 years' time it'll reach Glace Bay, it'll reach North Sydney. I don't think it's a proper model. It's a model we watch in the province. And I'll just use the example of, if you've got 20 new businesses, yeah, maybe 12 of them might end up in Sydney, but the 20 of them shouldn't end up in the city core. You have to grow the municipality as a municipality. Example of one of the comments made in regards to the regional library. We have a Sydney Regional Library. A lot of people think that when we get a new library, it's a new library for Sydney. But what people don't necessarily realize is that the Northside Library, Manitou, Glace Bay, New Waterford, Bedeck, Ingonish, a lot of people would say Ingonish, didn't know Ingonish had, our bookmobiles, they're all supported by the regional library. We're able to house a lot of documentation, files, books, videos, various different things within that facility to support the various facilities across our whole municipality. And without that core library in place, there could be very much a lot of those libraries that wouldn't even be in existence today. So it's a thing of looking at the central library being a library for our municipality, and that's how I see that. So thank you.
Thank you, Alden. I'm just getting a little bit of lobbying to get a quick point in on this question, and then I'd like to go to the next question. So Jim and then Darren.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and I totally agree with what Eldon has stated, that 30 years ago, Halifax wasn't what it is today. But when they regionalized, Halifax grew, and everybody outside of Halifax started to grow because there's no place to grow within. Well, we can say that this gets that or that gets this. That doesn't make any sense, because if you have a core, your people will be employed, as Arlene said, that people will come to Sydney. They'll be employed. And we have to recognize that core is where it's at. You start with Halifax was not what it was 30 years ago. It's massive, and I think that we have to grow out, not in.
Darren?
The other problem we got here is simply with the population loss, it's going to get very hard to support all our downtowns. There's just not enough people to support them. And we're not going to drive that. It's going to be business themselves that are going to do it. Shopping patterns are changing. Like they predict in the United States, 25% of the malls will be closed down in 5 years' time. That's from today. We can all see in our neighborhoods, the vehicles are going up and down the streets, the couriers. They're all shopping online, a lot of people, and that's what they do. And so we're going to have to adjust to that. But for us here, the biggest problem, of course, is there's a lot of people working on good ideas, Tom, but it's our tax rate. Our tax rate is killing us here. Like, there's young businesses that want to get started. They're heading to these hub areas because they don't want to start a business because of the taxes here. So how do we do that? Our issue is a fair funding. We've talked about this for a long time. A fair funding formula and the cap. The cap on assessment is killing us. Our residential rates would be 20% less today. Our young people don't want to build homes, the ones that are willing to, because of our taxes. These are things, and that's how important this funding formula is, and the cap for CBRM. We really need that bump, really, to help us with business and with young families. Even for older people who want to downsize their homes, they won't because they're scared to sell, because they're seeing the taxes with the new property. And sometimes it's smaller, but because of the cap in place, the rate is higher when they purchase.
So Darren, this question in part lifts off from your point. The concept of a CBRM charter has been much discussed. And I'd like to just hear a soundbite from our participants with respect to what are a few specific powers or resources that a charter should give to the Cape Breton Regional Municipality? A few specific powers or resources. Maybe we'll just go around the table for a quick soundbite. We'll start with Cecil.
Well, considering we're working with Minister Mumberket and his department on a charter, the elements we've asked for from council already are for economic tools, to deal with tax rate, to deal with economic incentives, and to do it in a manner, and the Premier's been clear, the Halifax Charter, example of everything being embedded in legislation versus what would be ministerial oversight and regulatory authority that can change with time as conditions are. To have a flexible mechanism for us to have that and make decisions that are not isolated. You still need oversight and accountability. So I think that the economic piece that we've talked about is the number one thing in a charter.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Don't have a comment on that one.
Okay, Early?
For the first time ever, I think hands down, I'm going to agree with the Honorable Mayor Clark. But we definitely need control of our economic tools, for sure.
Elena, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and I apologize. I had meetings in Halifax until 3:30 this afternoon, so it was quite a leap to get here.
You made it in good time.
Yeah, at least I made it. With all due respect, considering I've been here for all of, I think, 5 or 6 minutes, if I may just have a listen to what everybody else has to say, and I might have something to add at the end.
Sure. Roger.
On the charter, I'll step back, but I very much respect and appreciate what the mayor has been saying on the topic.
Okay. Gary?
It seems to me that there has to be the capacity to develop and implement in the municipality mechanisms of taxation that are based on something other than real estate assessment. This seems to be a core element of the fiscal crisis, and we need a mechanism by which it can be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Tammy?
Again, as what Cecil said, economic sustainability and economic independence, so we can survive.
Okay. Steve?
To go with what Mayor Clark was saying, not only the economic independence, but the legislative independence as well. Not all parts of Nova Scotia are created equal, not only as a geographical or economic situation, but also with how people work within each individual area. So I'd like to see a little more legislative ability in our charter as well.
Okay. Eldon?
Yeah, it's a repeat offender. Economics, the tools that we need to grow the economy, and our tax rate, as Councillor Brookswager, is the number one thing, in my opinion, that's killing us. It's hard to try to compete when you're, and I'll just use a round number, when your taxes are double what everybody else's is. I believe, if I'm correct, Vancouver, Toronto, and Sydney, I think, are the top three. I'm of the understanding in the country. I don't understand how we can be the third highest in the country and expect to really be able to compete on an economic level, and something needs to be done to put the tools in place for us to be able to help turn that around. So,
Okay, thank you. Kendra?
The amending formula. We need somehow figure out, I think, an amending formula for our charter. Halifax charter has continuously, every time the legislature is in session, you will see the HRM changes. Even if it's a single word, cut out a word, put in a word, they're constantly going to have to go back to the legislature. So I think we need to figure out if we can work with the province to work out our own amending formula so that we don't have to go back to the province to continuously amend a word. Taxation, I think, is very important. I also think that we need to have the ability to be flexible and work out some strategies within, with a social focus that are not mentioned in the MGA, but that we can put into tools. And I'm talking looking at our own poverty reduction strategies, homelessness strategies, youth strategies that we can really have teeth in. I also think that when you look at what the role of council is and the role of staff, there's not much. You actually have to go searching to have to look at. You have to go look at the local government book that I used to study under you to get what a clear definition is. And I think a charter of anything within government should have the clear role of what each staff person does and what the role of the council is.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, very simply, and Darren has it pretty well covered. I think taxation, taxation is killing us. So I think Cecil and Derek are on the way to forming or putting together this charter. Hopefully, that's going to be much better in a way than Halifax. And Kendra kind of hit it. I represent the CBRM on the UNSM, and we were up last week to a meeting, and I was surprised. We always thought that Halifax has it made. They have their own charter. But when I talked to Wayne Mason the other day, they've had about, I think they've got 28 letters into the province trying to make changes to their charter, and they haven't got an answer. So they sent us all a copy of the 28 requests. So even though we think Halifax has got it made, unless the charter is really worked out in detail starting off, I know Cecil will do this for us because he's a pro at this, and together with Derek. But hopefully our charter, when it's put together, will be much, maybe to our advantage, much more than Halifax's has been. But taxation is the big thing because, as you say, as Derek mentioned, it's hard to get businesses here without the proper, and we can't, our taxes are the highest in Canada, almost impossible to get people to come and settle here with business and so on, or even to build here or to live here. Taxation is really out of whack.
Okay, thank you. John?
I think it is best between the municipality and the provincial government, and I hope they can achieve that very soon. I think it's an important tool for controlling our own future as a region. And I know my boss, Mr. Eichmann, had raised this within the past week, actually, in response to an issue Senator Christmas raised.
Okay, Jim?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. I totally agree that, the council has been working with Mayor Clark and on this issue, and in particular with taxation and economic development. And I think we have to recognize that when we do it, and this was stated by our mayor several times, we have to do it right. Not be like Halifax, every time we turn around, 27 letters gone in. We'll do it right the first time, and we'll get it done. Sometimes there is a little bit of a mistake, but we can work through that. But get it done right, and that's where we're heading. With the legislation ability that our mayor has, he'll know exactly what direction we should be going.
Darren?
As mentioned, 30,000 people gone, and we still have the same number of miles of roads to maintain and services to provide in CBRM. So when you talk about a tax rate reduction, that's a little difficult. But we have to do this. We got to invest. We got to try to help our small business, and we have to have a rate decrease for startup businesses, for small businesses from 1 to 20. We really got to get this charter and get this moving.
Okay, Derek? Derek is not there right now. Okay, okay. We'll sort of make sure that this discussion gets reflected back to him. So I just want to pick up on a couple of the points, and certainly there are sort of areas of broad consensus going around the table on at least the framework of a charter. Cecil, when you mentioned sort of the greater economic powers, what does that mean in respect to sort of taxation, the ability to raise revenue, the ability to start corporations, et cetera?
Well, it's just, when you look at it, of course, the former city of Sydney had a charter, so your two cities of the province traditionally had charters in effect. And actually, on the weekend, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of Centre 200, and Manny MacDonald will tell you, council, because of their charter of the day, while they had a hotly contested decision to invest in Centre 200, that decision was theirs to make as a council, and they didn't, so they went to the table with that authority